So we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's our virtual Hub Open evening for Shelter and Shelter Scotland. So tonight is just an opportunity to hear from our frontline colleagues about the work that we're doing in the fight to end homelessness and bad housing. So we've got a really great lineup tonight. We'll have our Sheffield Solicitor, Lisa Craggs, Community Organiser from Shelter Scotland, Meg O'Neill, Chris, who will be sharing his personal story with us, and also Shelter's Director of Communications Policy and Campaigns, Osama Bhutta. So there'll be an opportunity later in the evening to ask questions. So if you can think of anything you'd like to ask, you can pop it in the chat or use the Q&A function, and we'll gather these for the question and answer session. Please do make sure that you're keeping questions respectful, and we will try and answer as many questions as possible in the time. But if there's anything we can't get to, we can always get back to you at a later date. We'll be due to finish at 6:30 this evening, and afterwards a recording of the event will be available on YouTube. So if you'd like to look back at it or share it with anyone, you'll be more than welcome to do that. You can find it by visiting YouTube and typing in Shelter's Community Fundraising channel, or if you registered for the event, then we will send a link out to you as well. We really hope that you enjoy some of the speakers that we've got tonight and that you find the event really inspiring. If you would like to donate throughout the evening, we do have a text to donate function. So we'll just show those details now and then again at the end. And if anybody would like to donate, you're more than welcome. But it is absolutely not obligatory, and we are really glad to have you here enjoying this evening with us. So first up, we've got Lisa Craggs. So Lisa, thanks so much for joining us and being our first speaker of the evening. Just to get us started, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what your role is in Shelter and what a typical day might look like for you? Hi, Lisa. I don't know, you're not on mute, but I can't seem to hear you for some reason. Would you mind just trying mute and then unmute again? I still can't hear you, unfortunately. I'm not sure if anybody else can. We could always try maybe going on to our next speaker and then see if we could come back to you, if that's okay, because I'm not quite sure what's happening. So Mega said sometimes coming out and coming back in work. So if you'd like to try that, Lisa, and then we'll come back to you if that's okay. So Meg, we'll go over to you now if that's all right. So thank you so much for coming along to speak to us about community organising this evening. Would you be able to give us some examples of how you're organising communities around Scotland?
So I have been in a true style of art attack. I've got a little presentation made as well, so I'll do a little introduction to community organising. So for everybody watching, hello, my name is Meg. I'm Shelter Scotland's senior community organiser, and I'm here to give you just a little flavour about what community organising actually is and how we work in communities. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. So if the host is saying that we can't share the screen, so if I could get access to screen sharing, that would be fab.
Okay, bear with me and I would try to do that. I didn't realise that wasn't.
No worries. Is it even a Zoom meeting if things all go smoothly?
Right, just bear with me. I might need one of my colleagues to help me give you that access. Are you able to try again, Meg, for us, please?
It's still saying that it's disabled screen sharing. I've also sent Abby my slides if Abby has access to screen sharing. Thank you.
Thank
so
you
much, Abby. You're an absolute hero.
That's all right, Meg. You just tell me when you need me to fast forward, okay?
Brilliant, thank you. If you can go on to the next slide. So not get too long, so I'm not going to deep dive. I could spend days and days talking about community organising. It's what I do for a living, but it's what I do outside of work as well. It's a passion of mine. So if you ever want to pick my brains, feel free to reach out, but we'll just cover 3 things tonight. So we're going to give you an introduction to what community organising actually is, how do our community organisers support their communities, and why this is important in the fight for home. So if we can go on to the next slide. The first one is just an overview of what community organising is. So Abby, if we can go on to the next one. I really like this way that community organising is explained, which is an explanation from a large national organisation called Community Organisers. So they describe it as, when communities work together, the possibilities for positive change are endless. Community organising is a work of bringing people together to take action around their common concerns and overcome social injustice. Community organisers reach out and listen, connect and motivate people to build their collective power. And when communities are organised, communities get heard and power begins to shift to creating real change for good. So that's a good sort of overview on what community organising is and how we might work. We can go on to the next slide. Thought it'd be really useful just to give you some examples of famous community organisers. It's not a new approach, it's something that's been done for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Some really famous notable community organisers is Gandhi. So Gandhi is really well known for his work in India with the India struggle for independence from Britain. So his organising strategies have actually shaped the work of many activists throughout India and beyond. Many people might not know that before becoming president, Barack Obama was also a community organiser. So he worked for 3 years as a community organiser in Chicago, lobbying City Hall to build an employment centre for impoverished Black communities around Chicago, and even staged a sit-in at the City Council. And his community organising tactics and tools were actually a key part of his election campaign and was used to galvanise supporters around the country. Martin Luther King is known for being a really transformative political leader, but he's also a brilliant strategic and tactical community organiser. And actually it was a lot of the community organising tools and techniques that he used that helped deliver the rights for which he's known for. And lastly, here we have Emmeline Pankhurst, who is famous for campaigning for the right for married women initially to have the right to vote. So she founded the Women's Franchise League and the Women's Social and Political Unit, the latter of which the members of were some of the first people to be called suffragettes, and they organised and got active in their communities. So we can go on to the next one. Thank you. So just to give you a little flavour of how in Shelter Scotland we might, in Shelter Scotland, sorry, we might organise our communities to fight social injustice around housing. This is a really, really great graphic, and it gives you a little flavour of the journey that community organisers will go on with communities. So you can see at the top, you've got a housing issue, so that's the story. So we find shared purpose, shared concerns, shared issues. We build relationships with people in and around our communities across Scotland. You can see the next stage is going on to building a strategy. So we know what the issue is, we've brought people together, we build that strategy for action. We start to build that structure. So how is that then going to play out in real life? And we support people to go and take tactical campaign action to affect change. So if you want to go on to the next slide, a couple of examples of how we do this is we'll bring people together and we'll listen to them. One of the key tools that we'll use in doing this is something called a conversation cafe. This is an example of a tool that we'll use. Many people use conversation cafes. It's not just used for community organising, but it's something that we use a lot of. It's a great informal and empowering space for people to come together and to identify shared issues, shared passions, shared concerns, shared ideas for action. And this is a little graphic from a conversation cafe that was developed. Just to give you, it's not from Shelter Scotland, sorry, but it's just an example of a conversation cafe, just to give you an example of what conversation cafes might be used for. So we can go on to the next slide. We help identify issues and solutions. So it's not just about looking at what the shared issues are, it's about identifying winnable solutions for communities. So you can see here, this is a really key tool of community organising, and this is called a problem and solution tree. So this is a tool that we'll use with our communities to help unpack what issues are. So you can see on the left, we've got our tree, and the trunk of the tree is the issue. And what we do is we support people to help identify what causes that issue. So if we're talking about homelessness, which can be a really broad and sometimes overwhelming topic to kind of consider, we unpack all the different root causes of that issue that kind of leads to that. And if you see the branches and the leaves, we also have the consequences of that as well. So what's the knock-on effect? And we simply switch that to look at solutions as well. So what's the big picture vision that our community wants to see? What are all the little solutions that can work towards seeing that big picture vision happen? And then what are the knock-on effects of that happening? And by doing that, we can look at small, tangible, winnable solutions that communities can pick up on and campaign on. So we go on to the next slide. We help identify power. You know, it's great if we brought people together. It's great if we've identified issues and solutions, but who actually holds the power to change those issues and turn them into practical solutions? So this is another really big tool that community organisers use. It's called a power map. Very simple, very straightforward, but we use it all the time and it's really helpful. It's basically each quadrant is where you identify different power holders. So you have your right, your top right would be people that A, are really, really powerful, but B, actually really strongly agree with your issue. So you want to galvanise their support with whatever campaign you're doing. All the way down to the bottom left, where actually there's not a lot of power and they quite strongly disagree with your issue. So they might not be people that you want to be focusing on galvanising support, but maybe even targeting just to try and change hearts and minds. And if we can move on to the next one. We've helped people, brought people together, we've helped people connect, share values, identify shared issues and practical solutions. We now know who the power holders are, we know who we want to target. What we do then is we help people build strategies for action. So we do this through using lots of tools, but this is an example of it. This is a strategy chart that we use. It's very, very straightforward. What do people short-term, medium-term, long-term want to change? What kind of resources do you have? Who are all the people that we want to target to galvanise support? Who are the power holders and decision makers that we want to push to make this change? And what campaign tactics will we use? Very simple, very straightforward, and very, very effective. And lastly, we go on to why this is important for the fight for home. I think this is a really good explanation, and I use this a lot. I really like this. So we have inequality, which is the top left, where the tree is skewed to the left, and people don't have equal access to opportunities. We have equality, which is down in the bottom left, where everything is evenly distributed, and people do have equal access to opportunities, but the system's still skewed to the left. So even though it's equal, still there's going to be inequality that will be experienced. Equity, which is part of the journey of campaigning for change, is the top right. And that's where you have custom tools and solutions that help identify and address the inequality that's been experienced, even if you do have equal access. So you can see that you've got the ladder that kind of builds people up on the left, but that's not what we want long term. What we want is justice, because none of that fixes the system. So by campaigning, by getting active, by getting organised, even if it's small wins, what we're looking for is to support communities to organise and campaign for their own house and justice. So that's to fix the system, that make sure that we then can offer equal access and opportunities. So you can see that the tree is fixed and everyone has equality. So that's just a very brief overview on what community organising is, and hopefully gives you a little bit of a flavour about what we mean when we say organising. But if anybody's got any questions, I'd be really happy to answer them.
That was really great. Thanks, Meg. I've got a couple of questions to ask you now, and then if anybody else sort of thinks of any, do feel free to just pop them in the chat as we go along. But I was just wondering if you could give one piece of advice to someone that's thinking about getting organised, what would it be?
My advice would be that you matter. I think that's something in a world that sometimes can feel quite overwhelming with big systemic issues. Sometimes you think, what's my little pebble in the ocean going to do? But your voice matters, and your voice has power, and your voice can make change, and your voice combined with lots of other people's voices that are experiencing the same issue is where real power starts to get built. And whether it is that you can bake a cake, or whether you're really good at social media, or whether you're great at painting and want to do placards or something like that, it doesn't matter what skills you can bring to the table. You can make an impact and make a difference when you want to bring together collective action. So I would say that would be my one piece of advice, is you matter and your voice matters.
That's really lovely advice, and hopefully will help to inspire more people to get involved. I think at the moment, most people would probably agree that we're seeing sort of more apparent political engagement with younger people. So I was just wondering if you think community organising has a role in that, and what that is.
Yeah, I think the climate strikes are probably a really good example of that. It's not necessarily only community organising, but community organising has played a role in galvanising support and for younger people to get organised and active. So yes, I think community organising does play a role in that, and it plays a role in any sector, in any issue that's wanting to be addressed, because it is about bringing people together to identify shared issues and shared solutions that people can campaign for. And it can be as wildly creative as you want. You can create an amazing demonstration and march the streets and be angry about an issue. And you could have young people that are taken to their schools to paint big placards and do something really fun and engaging. But it could also be something as simple as having a letter writing session in your local community centre to write letters to your politician, and having people coming to drop in to write a letter and explaining why they're really passionate about an issue. So community organising has a place, whether it's big, massive, let's shout and get excited and get angry, or whether it's quite small tactical solutions that we want to campaign for.
That's really great, thank you. So I think that's about all we've got time for from Meg, but if anybody has any questions, we will have a sort of Q&A session later. So do feel free to just keep popping them in as we go along. But thanks so much, Meg. That was really, really useful.
Thank you so much for having me along.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll try again with Lisa and see if we can get the sound working. Lisa, do you want to just sort of say hello and we can just see if it's working? Apologies, I think we just need to give Lisa the correct permissions again. So just bear with us 1 second.
Yeah, just bear with me. I didn't realise, I think Lisa had to sort of rejoin, so bear with me.
No problem, thanks Julie.
Okay, Lisa, I think you should be where you need to be. So yeah, I look forward to hearing from you.
We try again. Hi.
Ah, that's perfect. Thanks, Lisa.
I
Thanks
think
for
it's
bearing
already
with us on that.
I think it's already been said, it's not an online meeting without some kind of sound issue or technical issue, is it?
No, absolutely. And we got there in the end, so that's all that matters.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm sorry because I think you started saying this before, but we didn't hear you. So would you be able to just tell us a little bit about your role in shelter and what a typical day might look like?
Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. So I'm Lisa, I'm the managing solicitor for Sheffield and the Newcastle Hub, and I am based in Sheffield. So that's where I'm doing the majority of my work. I work within our legal and advice team. So we are providing support, advocacy, guidance for those who are facing housing issues. In terms of a typical day, it's difficult to describe a typical day. The work that we do is varied, and the issues that we have to deal with are different every day. But we're undertaking advice and providing advice to those over the telephone. We're advising people face to face. We provide advocacy when they're facing barriers in terms of making applications for homelessness assistance to the council, or fighting to get repairs done to their house, or dealing with private landlords. And as a solicitor, I'm providing advocacy at court. And during lockdown, that's been very interesting. That's been a combination of telephone hearings, it's been video conferencing, and it's been work at court face to face. So yeah, it's a varied job.
Yeah, it sounds like you must have a lot of variation in the role. So this next question might be a little difficult, but do you have like a particular favourite aspect?
I think it's knowing that obviously we're here to defend the right to a safe home. It's knowing that our work is all to that objective. It's ensuring that the person that we're helping them to resolve a problem, whether that's to stop them from losing their home, or it's getting them into a home, or making sure that that home is safe for them. So despite the fact that it's varied, it's that fact that we have that impact, and that by advising people, being out in the communities, we're able to see what's happening out there in Sheffield and in Newcastle, and using that knowledge to help link in with, say, the community organising aspect, and then helping to try and affect a wider change in the areas that we work in. So it's about having that impact both for the individual, but also that impact that we have for the communities that we work in as well.
Yeah, it's really great that you mentioned about working with some of those other teams. So would you be able to tell us a bit about the role of the legal teams and how they work with other teams in the hub as well?
So within the Sheffield Hub, there's the advice and legal team, but we also work alongside a large support team. So there is a support team that deals with homelessness prevention and resettlement. We have a team that works specifically around service users that are struggling with drug and alcohol problems. We have a children and families service. So what we aim to do in Sheffield is that where a service user comes to us, then we are hoping to provide a kind of a wraparound service. We're seeing that person, and that person is just more than that one presenting issue. We work together so that a person may have somebody who's providing them with legal advice. Say if they're struggling with rent arrears and they're facing possession action, they'll receive advice and representation from somebody like me to stop those rent arrears causing them to lose their home. But then there's also many times where that person will have a support worker within the hub, and they're helping them to unpick the other issues which are contributing to that presenting problem. So they could be helping them to manage debts, ensuring that they're receiving the right benefits so that their income is maximised, but also then ensuring that as a family that they're receiving the right services. So, you know, making sure that any issues are being dealt with around, say, mental health, and making sure that they're linked into the right services so that they're receiving, you know, kind of that support and counselling, assistance with making sure that, you know, children are in schools, and making sure that they're receiving you know, that kind of educational support that they're entitled to if they've got educational needs. It's our service running projects where families can come together and and get involved in projects within the hub that takes them away from their housing situation and gives them an opportunity. You know, the children and family service run trips out, etc. I know it's been more limited during lockdown, but that's something that they're getting back into, you know, to help people overall.
Yeah, that's great. I can confirm that the Children and Family Service do run some great trips, because I was lucky enough to go to Yorkshire Wildlife Park with them. But I'm sure everyone will agree that it's really great the way that the hub works in different ways to support the individual or the family, because obviously everyone's needs are quite different. But obviously also different communities have quite different needs. So would you be able to briefly explain what the community priorities are here in Sheffield, please?
Yeah. Okay. So the hub has community priorities. So what we're then looking at is, whilst we're helping the individual, we're looking at sections of people within the city and certain areas to have a look at those difficulties that they're facing. So our community priorities are assisting those who are experiencing multiple disadvantage. We're also specifically looking at a community priority which links to women and children and families. And then also we have a community engagement and capacity building priority. So in terms of the work that we do, we have individuals that come to us for assistance, but we also recognise that within the city there are communities out there that aren't accessing services, that are experiencing difficulties in their housing situation, but they don't know where to get help, or they don't have knowledge about their rights. So in Sheffield, we're reaching out into those areas. So there's a colleague of mine in the advice team who's going into children's centres in 2 areas of the city, and doing an outreach there. So instead of expecting people to come to us to receive that advice, we're going out there to find them and to find out the issues that they are facing. And then we're using the information that we're gathering to then help and try and help people to be more aware of their rights, and so that they can then advance those rights themselves. And also in terms of that community engagement, working with other organisations in the community to help them to know what people's housing rights are, so that we're trying to then build that knowledge base up in the city, so that people are aware of what they can do about their housing situations, and that they can be confident when they're advancing their housing rights.
That's great, thank you. So in terms of sort of the types of problems that people are facing, are there any particular themes that we're seeing that are coming up sort of time and time again?
I think that we see lots of issues around homelessness process, and I think it's about making sure that people are heard, and that when they are looking to, say, contact Sheffield City Council for assistance around their homeless persons applications, that they aren't experiencing barriers. So I think we see a lot of trends, particularly when we're dealing with people who are experiencing multiple disadvantage, that sometimes that they find that the process is not set up to be receptive to hear what they're saying, and that we need to make sure that when people in complex situations are trying to get assistance because they are facing the loss of their home, or they are homeless and they want the council's assistance with that application, that the barriers are being broken down, and that they are being listened to, and that they are receiving the assistance that they're entitled to. So trends are, we're looking at those barriers. We meet regularly with the council to highlight those issues, and to see what we can do to improve that journey that people go through when they're facing the loss of their home, or when they're needing assistance when they're homeless.
Thank you. Do you have any particular case or cases that you've worked on that kind of stick out to you that you'd like to share with us?
I had a case, I think a case last week. I think it sticks out in my mind because it was somebody that was in a situation. They came from a background where they'd had various issues around their mental health and their substance misuse issues, which had meant that their property was in an awful state. And it wasn't reasonable for them to live there. They'd gone into mental health crisis and ended up in a hospital placement. and we got involved in the case where they were being faced with discharge from hospital back to a property that really wasn't reasonable for them to continue to live there. It was in a dangerous state, but they were effectively being told that they had to go back there. Now, attempts had been made to get the council to respond to that and to provide accommodation, and those had been done through the hospital, but they failed. So we picked this up on a day in the afternoon where the hospital were looking to have to send him back because they didn't have space to keep him. So we had to negotiate with the hospital to keep him for an additional night, where we then liaised and we advocated with the council for them to provide emergency accommodation to avoid that very vulnerable person going back to a situation which was just likely to prompt a further mental health crisis. And I'm pleased to say we were successful in making sure that person had a placement in emergency accommodation. And then it's been sorted out that they don't have to return back to the tenancy. It's now been secured a placement in supported accommodation, where it's hoped that they can then be built back up again to having their own tenancy. And so for me, that sticks out because it's, you know, it had such an impact, and there was such a concern that, you know, being forced back into a tenancy which was unsafe and unsuitable could have just perpetuated that cycle of mental health crisis and substance misuse there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And it's really great to sort of hear that positive outcome for that person. So thank you. Well, it is great that we can sort of help individuals in this way. I know Shelter also works on strategic litigation cases. So would you be able to just explain a little bit about what that is and any examples where we've been successful in that?
Strategic litigation, it's about taking those themes and those issues that we see from those individual casework, the cases that we deal with, and then putting in place a strategy to try and deal with the larger problem. So we deal with lots of cases, say, where people are gatekept, they're not allowed to make a homeless person's application. So what we're then looking at is whilst we're helping those individuals with those cases, we're then thinking about the work that we can do with the local authority to try and resolve that issue, remove that barrier, so that instead of just fighting the individual cases, we're taking an alternative strategy to try and get rid of the problem itself, so that then hopefully we then don't have to keep advising people on the same issue and fighting the same fights. So I guess an example of strategic work that we've done locally in Sheffield is that we had seen a trend where a lot of homeless applicants weren't being allowed to bid on properties, so social housing, because they had in their past got former tenancy arrears, normally with the council or other housing associations. So that meant people were staying longer in temporary accommodation because they weren't allowed to bid, find a property and move on. We took case examples of where these delays had caused hardship, prevented people from being rehoused, and we have managed to secure the council's agreement to allow those people to bid on properties, so that their time, hopefully in temporary accommodation, is reduced and they are able to move on. Nationally, Shelter have done strategic litigation around issues such as, people may have seen the campaign around no DSS, and challenging agents on landlords refusing to take people who are in receipt of benefits. And that campaign's been run, and we've set up on our website lots of self-help materials so that you know, the tools are there and the resources are there for people to then hopefully mount challenges where if they still come across those problems. But that was a campaign that was pursued through the court, and a favourable decision was made to say that that kind of behaviour was discriminatory, and therefore we've set up and we've got the precedent there, and we have the tools there for people to be able to hopefully then manage those situations for themselves. So that, in essence, hopefully that's a local example and a national example there.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. And hopefully that's been sort of really informative to everybody. So thank you so much for joining us, Lisa. Obviously, if anybody does have any questions for Lisa, do feel free to just be adding them to the chat or using the question and answer function. But thanks so much for speaking to us tonight. And next we've got Chris. So hi, Chris. Really lovely to see you again. If you can just take yourself off mute and then say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing? Hi.
I'm not sure if people will actually be able to reply, but hopefully they can hear you. So thanks so much for joining us. Just to kick us off, would you be able to sort of introduce yourself and just tell everybody a little bit about your experience of homelessness?
Yeah, so I'm Chris. I live in Sheffield. I'm originally from Barnsley. I lived in Barnsley for 25 years until I had to move from Barnsley due to a breakup in the family. We had a death in the family, what was sudden over the Christmas period. Like my mum, like she had a breakdown, and it was a complete breakdown of the family home. Unfortunately, that couldn't be seen. It was just a sudden moment, and I didn't have any keys for the property to gain access to the property, which then suddenly left me homeless on the streets.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. I really appreciate that because it must have been really awful for you. So when you did end up going onto the streets, obviously it would have been, really terrible in a lot of ways, I'm sure. But was there anything in particular that sort of sticks out to you as sort of the hardest thing that you had to put up with?
It was the unknown, like standing at the gate, at the home that I'd grown up with and not having access to it, and not having, like no immediate family to gain access to the property. And it was the unknown, not knowing where to go, not knowing who I could trust, like not knowing like where I could go that night. So it was the insecurity and not feeling safe, and it was thinking about the, it was thinking, like second by second, moment for moment, like not knowing what I was going to do, because I was on one side, I had a roof over my head, and then suddenly, like without warning, I've been placed on the street.
Yeah, that must have been really scary for you. And I think the uncertainty must be a lot to deal with at a time when, you're already dealing with such a lot. But it is really great to see that you are obviously in a much better situation now. Would you be able to sort of tell us how you kind of came out of that situation and any help that you received from shelter?
How I came out of that situation, it was 2015 in Stone Desmond. I was working full time at Asda Chapeltown. So I've been there for a number of 6 years. So at this time, I've been there a number of years. So I was, like my work was stable. So I'd become homeless. And then I had a passion for cycling. So because I had the foundation, even though I was homeless and I was on the streets, I had the foundation in my day where, on a particular situation of someone becoming homeless, it's different stages and different individual circumstances to that individual. So it's the individual circumstances where it put me, because I had the safety net there to go to work. So like, even though I was on the street at the night time and not knowing where to go and what to do, I knew that the next morning, I knew that like for 10 hours on my day, I was in a workplace in a safe environment around the public. So I used to, I went to Decathlon where, where I knew I could purchase a tent and purchase a sleeping bag. And then it was all about where I could place that in a place of safety. So I chose to place it above the train station where I would have full, like 360-degree access of my surroundings. So I would feel safe in my environment, that if anyone was to approach me or anyone was to come near me, I would be able to diffuse that situation, even though it wouldn't potentially put me at any harm, that I was able to diffuse that situation. So I'd put everything away into a bike hub in secure, and then I'd cycle 6 miles to work. And then at night time, at 10 o'clock at night, I'd put everything together, and I'd cycle back into Sheffield city centre, place my bike in the bike hub in a secure place, and then get my tent, get my sleeping bag. Just imagine that I was someone who was commuting up and down the country, let's say from like Chesterfield to Barnsley, and I would stay there until the train station shut, and then I would get my belongings and then go pitch the tent up, and then 6 o'clock in the morning I'd get up I'd get up after very short sleep, because you couldn't really sleep at any point, because like just the slightest noise would wake you up and keep you, like your anxieties on high alert. So it was when I approached Sheffield City Council, tell them my situation, that I was working, I had a full-time job, I've been there for a number of years. I worked hard to get to where I was, and the response from the council was, well, Chris, you have a job, you have work, you've been working there a number of years, you can save some funds, like for a number of months, and put a bond down for a property. And it was only like when I heard about shelter in Sheffield city centre that I approached them, and I went to a walking centre in Sheffield in shelter, and I asked them the advice, tell them my situation, my individual circumstances, and then they began to liaison with Sheffield City Council, say, look, this individual's he actually has work, he's actually working, he's actually giving to community, that if he doesn't, receive just the littlest bit of help by having a stable roof over his head, regardless of where that place is, as long as it's a safe, secure environment for him, that if he wasn't going to receive this, that sooner or later, like the stepping stones and the platforms that he's built are going to soon become to crumble and break. So it was thankful and grateful for all the shelter help that was given, that they liaised and negotiate with the council, to find me a property.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that you were able to get some help in the end, Chris, and I'm really sorry that it did take you so long. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We're going to go on now to Osama, who is the Director of Communication Policy and Campaigns. So I think you'll obviously be really interested to hear from him, I would have thought, Chris, because I know you've sort of recently been getting involved in campaigns for shelter and helping us with that, haven't you? So that's fantastic.
Yes.
Lovely. So Osama, if you're around, would you just like to say hello?
I am around. Hello, hi Ellie, and hi everyone else as well.
Hi, thanks so much for joining us. So Osama's our final speaker for the night. So first of all, would you like to just sort of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your role is at Shelter and what it involves?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Osama Bhutta, and I'm the Director of Campaigns, Policy and Communications, which means I'm responsible for a lot of the change-making functions at Shelter. So you've heard from fantastic colleagues this evening at the front line of the housing emergency, What my department, CPC, spends a lot of its time thinking about is how do we make that systemic change that we need to not just make things better here and now, but also to make things better in the long run.
That's great, thank you. So I know you're quite recently joined here at Shelter, so could you tell us like when you joined and what you've been up to so far in that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been here for 6 months now. And before that, I worked in human rights. I was global director of communications at Amnesty International. So I was working a lot of global human rights, including housing and other economic issues, but also the things that human rights are very associated with in terms of things like torture and the death penalty. But it's been great to come home and to work on domestic issues, and the massive attraction for joining Shelter was that the organisation has a very clear analysis of the housing emergency, that people on the front line do need urgent help. But also we need to fix this for the long term. And the analysis is that we need many more social homes, that there's been a system failure because in the last number of decades, we've done something different with housing. We've made it put it completely in the hands of the private market. When we know actually this country depended on the state building homes. And that was the situation after the Second World War, and it existed for many decades, and we stopped investing in that. And the problems that we have right now of 250,000 homeless people, 1.6 million people waiting for social homes as a result of the state not building enough homes owned by the public and given out at fair rent. So the attraction in joining Shelter was, we've got very clear analysis on that. This country needs to build 90,000 of these social homes every single year in order to tackle the emergency. And we are willing to do what it takes to get that built and to get that done. And that's really compelling. I found that, sometimes charities don't always have that focus, and the fact that Shelter are very clear-eyed about the emergency and willing to do what it takes was a massive thing.
That's great, thank you. So if we kind of look forward now to the next few years, what would you say are sort of your top priorities?
I think the top priorities that we want to work with people on are, as I said, I think ultimately we need to get to that place where we're building a lot more publicly built housing, given out a fair rent. But the stage before that actually is that the country's got to agree that we've got a problem. So if we're going to get to the solution, it's absolutely strange how we've normalized situations such as, the numbers of people homeless, this phenomenon that we've created, and I don't mean phenomenon in a good way. In the last decade, the rise of temporary accommodation and thinking that it's okay to have people and families and kids living in bed and breakfast and sometimes very grim circumstances, and thinking that just because they've technically got a roof over their head, as insecure as that is, that's acceptable. So I think there's a lot more work, and our plans that we've developed are that we've got some ideas on how we do that to make sure that people understand the situation and understand that it's not normal, and to understand that we can do something about it. We don't have to put up with this, that as a country our values are different. We're a country that has said that our homes are castles and everyone should have a castle. And I think that's the message that we want to take to the country, and then lead them towards that solution of getting lots more social homes built for people.
So obviously a lot of the work that you're looking to do will involve sort of engaging with the government. So could you tell us what that's like to be working with them, and how you go about engaging them in your work?
Well, the work with the government takes many different forms. A lot of it's reactive, and it's the things that people would expect. That, we're talking with MPs, we're looking at what's coming up in terms of legislation, and there's a few pieces of legislation coming up which are really, really important. A triple whammy, and possibly a once in a generation opportunity that we have. Which is, so first of all, the government are going to be publishing a social housing bill, looking at making sure that there's adequate standards within the social housing sector. That's game changing, and this this issue has been in the news quite a bit recently. We're looking at also promised legislation on renters reform. So in the private rental market, massive issues, rogue landlords, slum landlords, very sadly as well, and renters, entire generations of people who live on the precipice of, will my landlord evict me at any moment? So we have the opportunity to end abominations like that, and also the ongoing conversation around social housing and how we're going to get the pathway to building it, because it's not just about the investment. There are certain legislative changes that need to be made. So all of this is bubbling away nicely, and the impressive thing that I've found with our teams at Shelter is that they've got the very clear policy analysis on what needs to change, and that is essential in enforcing change within the housing sector in this country, but also great connectivity. Obviously, Shelter as an organisation has been around for how many years is it now? 60 odd years, and it's built a reputation for itself. So doors open, MPs and ministers are receptive to what we have to say. I'm also hopeful that given the conversation in government about levelling up, that we've also got an opportunity to help government to realise that ambition. I mean, there cannot be levelling up until everybody is in a safe, affordable and decent home. So I think that message is getting through. I'm quite optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that we can really make progress on all of these issues.
Yeah, it does definitely sound like you're making a lot of progress, which is great. What sort of reactions have we seen so far from sort of things we've done previously?
From within government?
Yeah.
Good. I mean, I think there's been different phases. So colleagues will say that over the last number of years, there have been ministers who have taken the issue of housing more seriously than others. The level of engagement that we have right now from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities is much improved of late. If you look at the interview that the Secretary of State Michael Gove did with ITV News last week, and I'd encourage people to go and check it out on YouTube. You'll see that there's a deeper level of analysis about what's going on, and a commitment verbalized towards solving these issues, and that commitment was also put into the Levelling Up white paper, which promised the renters reform bill, promised improvements in social housing, and in fact it promised to increase the number of social homes within the state sector as well. So these definite improvements, and I think we're as I said, more optimistic right now about the prospects for the housing sector than we were, say, 12 months ago.
That's really positive to hear, thank you. And hopefully everyone else is feeling as inspired by those positive actions as I am. So if somebody in the audience did want to get involved and to support in this sort of campaigning work, how could they do that?
Well, if you go to our website, shelter.org.uk, you'll see information about all the campaigns that are mentioned on the social housing side, on the renters reform side. So get involved, but also I know that there are hubs across the country, so look up if there are any hubs in your particular locality who are driving forward a lot of this work. So and get together with your fellow citizens and make that change. Because honestly, I've seen this time and time again. People think that you need thousands and thousands of people hitting the street to make change, and that's not true anymore. I think maybe that was once upon a time, but we're living in an environment where, you know, people have become more cynical about the value of campaigning, so they do less of it. So when it does happen, it's really, really powerful. And sometimes it just takes a few people with a bit of ingenuity, a smart placard, just a sharp message. And you can get your local authorities, your councils, as well as central government, really paying attention with sometimes just a little bit of effort. So, you know, get together with people and make things happen.
That's great. Thank you so much. So I have gone through all the questions that I had for our fantastic speakers this evening, but I've seen that there are a few that have been coming through the chat for various people. So we'll just go on to those. And if anyone does think of any more questions, do feel free to keep adding them. So the first question we've got is for Meg. So Meg, to what extent would you say people need to be mobilised before they can move along that funnel of relationship building in order to engage and get active? So is it a case of finding people who are already mobilised and giving them order and structure, or is it actively encouraging people to get mobilised?
Yeah, so I think it's really good to kind of explain the difference between mobilising and organising, because both are valid ways to work and ways to campaign, but they are both quite different. So mobilising is a process of developing and gathering momentum around a set issue. So that's if, for example, with Shelter Scotland or Shelter England, we might have an issue that we've identified. We know that we want to target the government, as an example, and we know that we want to do that through having a petition on our website. So say that's the campaign that we're doing. So mobilising is gathering support around that and getting people to sign a petition. Organising is going right back to the beginning with that, and what we do is it's a very long process. It's almost like playing the long game. So it's slowly building up an individual or groups, like knowledge, skills, tools, confidence, and really importantly, agency to be able to create change around the issues meaningful to them. So mobilising is a part of organising, but it comes much later in the process. So the answer to your question is no, you don't already need to be mobilised or have taken any action before, because what we do is we really build up your ability and confidence to be able to tackle housing issues and campaign on housing issues. You could never have taken an action before, have never even thought about writing to a politician, and through that process that I've talked about, through relationship building, conversation cafes, which isn't a period of a couple of weeks, it could take months of doing this in a community, having conversation cafes, listening to people, training, skill building, providing resources, being there, having a presence, slowly but surely someone's ability and confidence to be able to lead on their own campaign actions starts to emerge. And then what you would see is they have, just like what I was saying about how Shelter Scotland might have a campaign, you see someone developing their own campaign and they know who they want to target, but then importantly, they know how they want to mobilise people around their issue to get garner support in order to get that momentum. So it's like going right back to the beginning and taking people on that journey. I hope that answers the question and kind of gives you a bit of clarity between mobilising and organising.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Thank you. So the next question is actually also for you, Meg, if that's okay. And somebody has asked, they'd love to know what the most exciting or challenging campaign is that you've worked on.
Oh, that is a really good question. I have worked in campaigning and activism for years and years and years, so there's many different things that I've done over my time. I think in recent times, I think the most exciting thing that I've been part of, and it's very different to the way that we would normally work, is instead of working directly with the community, I actually helped support a group of grassroots organisations and different charities to build momentum and support around unsuitable accommodation for people seeking asylum in Glasgow. And we built momentum and a campaign centering the voices of the people experiencing this issue and gave them a platform to speak out. And it was really exciting because we had a lot of engagement from MPs and MSPs and media, and the voices of the people that were being most directly affected by this issue, through using organising techniques and tools, managed to get their voices heard by the very people that can make decisions. So it was very exciting being part of that in the middle of lockdown, from this desk right here, suddenly seeing all of these voices being lifted up through the organising tools and techniques that I used. So that was very, very, very exciting.
That's great, thank you. So this isn't a question, but I would just like to say, Chris, you have had a lot of very, very positive feedback, and there's a lot of support for you in the chat. So I would recommend you go and have a look, because everybody would like to say thank you. The next question that we do have is for Lisa. So Lisa, how have services had to adapt throughout the pandemic to support those experiencing housing injustice?
I think it's been a steep learning curve on the technical front. So we initially had to adapt to not being able to see people face to face. And so that's making sure that we have got routes into our service so that people can contact us, say, via telephone, making sure that we've got access to interpreters where needed, you know, making best use of email and video calls. So it's, you know, it was a challenge, but I think it's something that it gives us kind of, you know, we've got more tools to be able to deal with cases now, and we're continuing with some of those, you know, kind of some of those routes to get people into our service now and to provide a, you know, as an effective service as possible. So yeah, certainly very challenging. And yeah, normally I'm a bit more on it in terms of my my online my use of Zoom than I was to start off with today. So no.
No, that's great, thank you. And it was not your fault, the Zoom. Sometimes it just does its own thing, doesn't it? So thanks so much for sticking with us on that. The next question is for Osama. So what societal barriers are preventing people from having access to a safe and secure home?
Societal barriers. I take it you've not got any definition of what that is. I mean, the biggest one is there's not enough homes, and I think sometimes people in the sector can complicate this. Yes, there are all sorts of things that are needed here and now, but the fact is that if we have 250,000 homeless people, we don't have 250,000 homes to put them in, because that's the solution. So that's what we need to work towards, most of all. Get those numbers of homes up. And the barrier before that is creating the will to do it. I think we can convince people about the logic of the argument, but until we get more people accepting we've got a problem and wanting to do something about it, which is what we're working on at Shelter, and campaigning for that solution, you know, the government unfortunately not going to be under enough pressure to do that. So we've got to build this kind of politics of hope and aspiration, which is difficult because, you know, we've been told for over a decade now that we can't do things as a country, we can't have nice things. And I think we've got to raise our expectations, because actually it is possible to, and the pandemic showed that money can be found to do the things that have to be done. What we've got to show is that this has to be done.
Great, thank you. So I think that is all the questions that we've had come in so far. If anybody does have any further burning questions, then get them in now. Or if anybody does think of anything after tonight and you'd really like to ask it, then you can always email community@shelter.org.uk, and somebody in the team will be really happy to get back to you with an answer afterwards. But thank you so much to our speakers for coming tonight, and we hope everybody's enjoyed hearing from them and has learnt something today. And thank you so much to all the attendees for showing your support and really getting involved. We really appreciate that you've come along tonight. So thank you so much. And we'd love you to get in touch if you'd like to hear any more.